I want to welcome you to our service today. All those that are joining us online right now, we're grateful that you've tuned in to the Church of the Brethren in Garden City as we continue our series, Married Forever. I want to say right up front that there's no truth to the rumor that Brenda got out the cast iron skillet and whacked me on the side of the head. Actually, I had some cancer spots removed off my ear this week, and I'm doing fine. I really am. I'm doing fine. I look a little bit like Dumbo the elephant, but I'm doing fine. You have an outline in your bulletin if you want to follow it. We're going to talk about happily ever after and other marital myths. Tim Keller writes, "Marriage is glorious but hard. It is a time of strength and yet sweat, blood, and tears. Humbling with exhausting defeats and glorious victories. No marriage I know of more than a few weeks could be called a fairy tale." Paul writes in Ephesians 5, we're going to spend most of the day in Ephesians 5 if you want to turn there. He writes in Ephesians 5:31 to 32, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. A profound mystery. It's not surprising that it's a mystery. Sometimes you fall into bed after a long, hard day of trying to understand each other and your kids, and you can only sigh, this is a profound mystery. Unfortunately, for most of us, there's more truth in that than we realize. So today I want to talk the truth about marriage, and I want to debunk some popular myths that are out there. So here's the first myth. Being married will make me happy. Being married will make me happy. During the romance dating stage, we just think that each day is going to get better, better, better. Happy, happy, happy. When Brenda and I got married, after a short dating period, I took her from Wichita to the hills of East Tennessee. I was a full-time seminary student working in a very small, dysfunctional country church. And I worked as a custodian at a trade school at night to help make ends meet. She worked in a hospital in the heart cardiac floor as a nurse. She was working full time, and my workaholism was putting a strain on our marriage. A couple of years later, Clark came into the picture, and then just the week just before we were finishing in East Tennessee and moving to Oregon, literally the week before, the Friday before, Clark had his first of 36 seizures. Clark was, by the time he was 2.5, Clark had been in the hospital 12 times. Being who I am, I would throw myself into my work, and even the senior minister, I was a youth minister at the church in Tillamook, Oregon, and the senior minister said, "Bob, what in the world are you doing here? Your son is in the hospital. You need to be where your son is." Trust me, it wasn't happy, happy, happy. It was stress, stress, stress. And I personally wasn't handling it very well. By the time Clark was 2.5 years old, he never had another seizure, and he's been as healthy as a horse ever since. Our marriage wasn't a fairy tale, but it was strong and getting better every day. I don't want to imply that Clark was the reason there was stress in our marriage. He's sitting right there, so I have to be careful what I say. I don't want him to think that he was the reason there was stress. Okay, the situations were there, but Clark was not the reason. But our marriage got better. We got through those tough times because at the core of our marriage, we had Christ. You see, we all think everything is going to be blissful, and it's just isn't going to be that way. You see, when you get married, you have two self-centered people getting married, and they need to learn to navigate how to exist with each other at the center of their life. We all think we want our spouse to be perfect. Reminds me of the lady that wrote to Dear Abby. She said, I'm 44 years old. I'm looking for a man with no bad habits. Dear Abby wrote back, so am I. You see, marriage starts to reveal what romance and courtship concealed. In marriage, you begin to understand who that person really is. You may be married to a fearful or a proud person. You may be married to an inflexible person whose every other sentence begins with, it's my way or the highway. You may be married to an abusive, harsh person who people tend to respect but rarely love. You may be married to an undisciplined and unreliable person. You may be married to a perfectionist who irons the socks and the dish towels. You know the kind I'm talking about. It's the kind that when you get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, you come back to bed and your side of the bed's already been made up. That's a perfectionist. You see, in our culture, people get married because they feel a chemistry or an attraction. They believe it's going to be nothing but happy, happy, happy. You see, self-centeredness is at the center of every marriage. And I want to say this very carefully. Self-centeredness is the cancer that needs to be cut out. And sometimes it's painful. Thursday, when we went into Wichita to have the 2 cancers removed off my ear, I'll be honest with you, all Thursday after the surgery, I was feeling great. Didn't have any pain at all. And that anesthetic wore off about 11 o'clock, and oh my, there was so much pain. But I had to have those cancers taken out. I had to. If you want your marriage to survive, you need to get those things out of your life. Self-centeredness. Paul is absolutely on target when he writes in verse 21 of chapter 5, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. Gene Apple says, in order for your marriage to survive, every marriage needs to have a love-driven, truth-telling, grace-extending relationship to each other. Let me say that again. Every marriage needs to have a love-driven, truth-telling, grace-extending relationship to each other. You see, in the middle of our marriage needs to be Christ. So what did Christ do for us? He died for us. He left us the magnificence of heaven. We can only imagine what heaven's going to be like. He came to earth on a love-driven mission for you and me. He told us the truth about ourselves and about sin. Then he selflessly died on the cross so we could have amazing grace. The secret to mutual marriage is mutual sacrifice. Let me say that again. The secret to mutual marriage is mutual sacrifice. It is submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. So you ask, why should I get married? It is a mystery. Actually, we get married because it is the picture of the perfect relationship between Christ and his church. He starts making you and me, my wife and me, and you and your spouse, in his image. And marriage is often the vehicle God uses to help people to be remade from the inside out. In Ephesians 5:25-28, Paul writes, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands, you should love your wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself." We are told to make it holy. We need to cleanse her. We need to be loving her in that way. As he remakes us, we help others to be made more into the image of Christ. Now, next month, Brenda and I will celebrate our 49th anniversary. It's not because it's been happy, 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 but because at the foundation of our marriage has been mutual love and sacrifice for each other. It's been a safe place for both of us to grow in Christ as he cleanses us. That's why Paul described love as being the opposite of self-centeredness. You know what self-centeredness is? Now listen what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 13. This is the opposite of self-centeredness. It's not a mistake that in the wedding ceremony I wrote for Brenda and I include this very passage. Listen to what Paul writes, 1 Corinthians 13, 4 and 5. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own ways. It is not irritable or resentful. You see, when two people admit that they are going to work on self-centeredness, you have the prospects of a great marriage. Some would say, since marriage is so difficult, and it's not going to be happy, 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 maybe we should just live together. 60 years ago, hardly anybody in America lived together. Now, more than half of the couples in America are living together out of marriage. Which leads me to myth number 2. Living together increases the odds of marital success. Myth number 2. Living together increases the odds of marital success. I want to let everybody know the facts say that it's not true that if you live together, you're going to have better success in your marriage. In fact, you're more likely to break up later. It increases the likelihood of divorce. And the more partners you have had in the past, the higher the risk for your marriage. So why is it? Why does that happen? It's simple. Because when you live together, you always know that the exit door is right over there. It bleeds insecurity. Because everything or anything could be a deal breaker. But when you say, I'm in this till death do you part, it changes everything. If you just want to live together, that door, that exit door is always open. But when you marry, you make the shift from temporary to permanent. It is for better or worse. It is knowing you are in it together till death do you part. Studies show that spouses hold each other to higher levels of responsibility and greater discipline than people get from friends and family. If you are single, you can spend your money any way you want. But when you are married, you have to look at your spouse in the eye when you pull that brand new SUV and speedboat into the driveway with the 10-year of car payments and boat payments. Changes everything. Young people, some of them say, well, most married couples are unhappy. That isn't true either. When a survey was taken, 61 to 62% of all married couples said they were very happy in their marriage. And 2/3 of those who said they weren't very happy were very happy 5 years later if they stuck it out. And that's the case. You got to stick it out. If you're living together, you need to know if you're living together. And I'm looking around the room, and I know there aren't very many. But there may be some. And I don't know who's listening to me on the internet, so I'm just going to say it. You need to know that I love you, that this church loves you, that God loves you. But if you commit to marriage, God will have a higher calling for you. All right, myth number 3. God is designed for us a one and only. God is designed for us a one and only. Somewhere on planet Earth, God has one person for you. Single people get this pressure that they have to seek all over the planet for their one and only. They sit in shopping malls or beaches or go to the lake. They sit in churches looking for that needle in the haystack of 7.8 billion people. People sit there saying to themselves, I wonder if he's the one. And at other times they say, I'm hoping he's not the one. We need to stop saying that marriages should be hard. It is hard. It is hard. Some people say, if marriage is that tough, maybe my one and only is still out there. Really? You want to keep looking? Would you tell a professional athlete it's going to be hard? No, you wouldn't do that. No two people are compatible, totally compatible. God has given us choice. If you are a follower of Christ, His Word tells us that you should choose someone who shares your commitment to Christ. Let me say that again. If you are a follower of Christ, His Word tells us that you should choose someone who shares your commitment to Christ. All right, myth number 4. Marriage is just a piece of paper. Even this week, my wife and I were watching a TV show, and a piece of paper came up. I said, I'm going to talk about that Sunday in my sermon. People say, I don't need a piece of paper to love you. It only complicates things. A person says, I really have romantic feelings for you. I have passion for you. I'm head over heels attracted to you. But this piece of paper won't help that. It only complicates it. Marriage is much more than a piece of paper. It is much more than romantic passion and feelings. More than having chemistry. Marriage is a covenant relationship instituted by God in the Garden of Eden. And that's letter A. And that's really where I want to focus today. Marriage is a covenantal relationship. Let me say it again. Marriage is a covenantal relationship. It's the highest commitment possible between two people. It is, as I said before, a love-driven, truth-telling, grace-extending relationship that pictures the relationship between Christ and his church. We live in a world with two kinds of relationships. One is consumer, the other is covenantal. Most of our relationships are consumer relationships. Let me just explain that to you. So you go to Ace Hardware and you buy something and its price is so high that you realize you need to go to the only true hardware store in Garden City, True Value Hardware. Vaughn knew I was going to say this, True Value Hardware, to get the better deal. Every time you get the better deal. Some of you are Ford people. You wouldn't be caught dead in a Chevy. But I just want you to know that Ram rules the road. We live in a consumer. I had a girl, she's my secretary in Florida. And I said, we've got 48,000 college students at the University of Florida. It's blocks away from our church. And how come we only have a few coming to the church? She said, Bob, they're all consumers. They're just shopping from one church to another church to another church to another church till they find what they're looking for. We live in a consumer world. Same is true about marriage. So many people think, well, if I can marry this one, but in 3 months maybe I can trade her in for somebody else. Or when she gets to be 40. And you've told that story, that joke. I'm sure that line has come off your lips. When I get to be 40, I'm going to trade her in for 2 20s. You know? We wouldn't know what to do with 2 20s. That's a consumer relationship. It's not how marriage works. Marriage is a covenantal relationship. It is a binding relationship. Brenda and I did not choose Clark. He didn't just show up one day on our doorstep. He knows I'm going to say this. I actually read all this. We didn't pick his hair color or his temperament. We never thought of taking him back to the store to get a better model. Well, maybe when he was 18, we thought that a little bit. When he showed up, he was the neediest kid in the world. He needed to be fed and clothed. He needed to be cared for 24/7. He needed his diaper changed and rocked in the middle of the night. We invested a sizable investment in him. And we didn't send him an invoice when he turned 18 and said, here's what you owe us. Parents, continue to be there for your kids. You need to be there for your kids, even when they struggle or face issues. There's nothing you would not do for your child. Nothing. It would be unthinkable for us to abandon our kids. Why? Because the parent-child relationship is a covenant relationship. It's never a consumer relationship. The same is true about the marriage. B, it is both horizontal and vertical. The marriage relationship is like no other. It is both horizontal between a man and a woman and vertical between the couple and God. Genesis 2:24 says, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. There's an exclusiveness from their parents and from others. They become one. They're cemented together. There needs to be a leaving from the parents and a cleaving together. So let me ask you, how many of you know the old nursery rhyme, Billy Boy, Billy Boy? Do you know that nursery rhyme? I asked a 30-something, they never heard of it before. Let me sing it for you, okay? Oh, where have you been, Billy boy, Billy boy? Oh, where have you been, charming Billy? I have been to seek a wife, she's the joy of my life. She's a young thing and cannot leave her mother. You remember that? Any of us? Okay. Here's the last verse. How old is she, Billy boy, Billy boy? How old is she, charming Billy? 3 times 6 and 4 times 7, 28 and 11. She's a young thing and cannot leave her mother. Folks, you do the math. She's 85 years old. Do you want to know how old her mother is? I just cracked me up when I saw that. A covenant relationship is a leaving and a cleaving and a holding on to each other. It is shutting off, listen to this, it is shutting off all other options and being united together. It is also a covenant with God. I want you to look at 2 passages from the Old Testament, Proverbs 2 and then Malachi 2. Proverbs 2:17 says, who forsakes the companion of her youth and forgets the covenant of her God. There's a covenantal relationship with God. And then in Malachi 2:14, but you say, why does he not? Because the Lord but the Lord was witness between you and the wife of your youth, to whom you have been faithless, though she is your companion and your wife by covenant. When you make their vow, you make it between you and God. It is a covenant. Marriage vows are mutually binding. It is what keeps a marriage together, even in the tough times. When someone says, I love you a lot, but let's not spoil it with a piece of paper, what they are telling you is, I don't love you enough to close out the other options. They're looking for the other option. Marriage is so much more than a piece of paper. It is a covenantal relationship that is a stunning blend of love and law, vertically committed to God and horizontally committed to each other. Remember, marriage needs to have a love-driven, truth-telling, grace-extending relationship to each other. Here's the conclusion, folks. It's very simple. The goal of marriage is to recapture the high and holy calling of marriage. You need to make it your goal to make it a covenant relationship, a binding relationship. Now I'm going to say, next week we were planning to have the sharing of the vows and renewing of the marriages, and I've got 6 couples signed up to do that. And I will just be honest with you. I sent a note to each of them and said, I'm very concerned about the fact that in every picture we're going to take is going to be this god-awful right ear that I have today. So I don't want to spoil that day for anybody. So we actually are going to push it to August or September after the summer, and we'll everybody will renew their vows by then. Maybe some of our single people will be ready to get married by then. Last week, I mentioned that if some of our single people wanted to get married, we could do that next week at that service. And I just want to tell you, 2 of our men turned their heads around so fast, they got whiplash. They had to go to a chiropractor, and they sent me the bill from the chiropractor this week. I'm just joking. They did turn their heads around fast. They thought I was talking about them. There are other single people here. But anyway, so next week I'll be preaching. It won't be the marriage renewal service. We're going to do that later. And I just want everything to be beautiful, and I don't want anything at all to be a distraction. I have loved today. Our kids have done a fabulous job. You guys all have done just a wonderful, wonderful job. And please thank our youth and their leader, Lacey, before you leave today. They did a terrific job. They picked out the closing song today. It's a Lauren Daigle song. You know, one thing about marriage, it's all about trust. Trust in each other and trusting in God to be that foundation for our marriage. We're going to sing that song, Trust in You, as